Hello. Welcome to Law Update Supplement. Again, this is a 2-hour law update course, a great supplement to anyone who maybe took the 6-hour pre-broker series around law. That met the broker requirements, but does not meet your renewal requirement for 8 hours of mandatory law updates. So again, this is a just 2-hour supplement for maybe someone who's needing to fill that little bit of a gap. This is going to go through the most frequently asked questions. We're in 4 categories, again, to review part of the introduction. We're going to talk about agency, disclosures, contracts, and then those permitted and prohibited activities, such as the things that your unlicensed assistants can and can't do. So we are going to start with agency. And the most frequently asked questions around this topic. So let's hop into it. The first question is, I've been hearing about duties owed to licensees to both parties in a real estate transaction. What duties does an agent representing a seller have to a buyer? And this really centers around 3 general topics. 1, you got to act in good faith and be honest with all parties. Exercise reasonable skill and care. And what that really means is, as an agent who is licensed, the public expects you to know more than the average Joe, average person out there. And then the third one is really the big one, and that centers around material adverse facts. We're going to talk about material adverse facts multiple times in this course. But let me just give the overview, and then we're going to do it again in another section. But a material adverse fact is something of such significance that it would change a party's decision to go into contract, or it would change the contents of that contract. So for example, you've got a property that you're working with a seller, it's under contract, and something happens like June 30th of 2018. We had that massive flood, and all of a sudden homes that maybe had never had water in the basement before had water in the basement. That is a material adverse fact, and those must be disclosed to all parties no matter what. And I'm sure on that date there were several of you that maybe had deals fall apart. Unfortunately, some that maybe stood together, but you can't just make the call of, gosh, this was a fluke Mother Nature flood. We'll never have that happen again, or I'll be another 50 or 100 years. No big deal. I'm sure the buyers will understand and not disclose it. No, those always get disclosed no matter what. So material adverse facts really center around 3 items: things that would affect the value of the property, things that would affect the structural integrity, and then the third one is things that would pose a health concern, such as radon. Okay. So the next question is, I've heard a lot about confidential information. If I'm representing a seller, what is considered confidential? Now, this is probably a really big list. And I know that there is a really nice long list in the definition under the administrative rules 193E. But here is kind of the overview for you. These are the things that would be confidential for your sellers. Information that could place a seller at a disadvantage when negotiating, whether the seller is willing to accept less than the asking price, the seller's motivating factors, whether the seller will agree to terms different than those offered, the seller's real estate needs, and the seller's financial information. So just as a few examples, a lot of times we have our sellers say, let the buyers know that we're really motivated. And usually what that means is they're motivated on their time frame, right? They want an offer fast, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're motivated to negotiate down on their price. So if you do have a seller that says a comment like that to you, it is wise to get that in writing that you're able to share that. But I also think we're doing a good stewardship with our clients if we ask, great, what does motivated mean? Because if it means that they're willing to take less, that's a great time to ask for a price reduction, or some of you like to call it a price improvement. Sounds a little bit nicer, I get it. But I would definitely say get those things in writing, even if it's just a conversation. The seller's motivating factors. This could be a big job transfer or job promotion. It could be a divorce. That's always a big one. Again, anything that would put them at a disadvantage when with negotiating, we need to keep those things confidential. Whether the seller will agree to terms different than those offered. Um, I think probably the big one we see with that is when we list properties, we maybe detail out what types of financing the seller is willing to work with. Conventional, cash, FHA, VA. But some of your sellers choose to just work with cash and conventional, which means if we're telling people, yeah, they'll work with an FHA, we're maybe doing a disservice because that's really the seller's decision. The seller's real estate needs, and then the big one is financial information, such as maybe what their payoff would be and what they owe on the property. My big three rocks I always categorize in, I'm sure you'll learn, and for those of you who've worked with me before, I love things in groups of three. But my big three rocks for confidential information is strategy, motivation, and finances. Okay, so next question. A buyer's agent must preserve the buyer's confidential information. What must the buyer's agent keep confidential? Well, the list is really very, very similar to what we just reviewed. We're just talking about buyers now. So anything that would put them at a disadvantage when negotiating, whether the buyer is willing to pay more than what the asking price is, the buyer's motivating factors, whether the buyer will agree to terms different than those offered, their real estate needs, and their financial information. So let's just do a quick review. I'm sure you all have examples that you're thinking of in your mind right now. Obviously, paying more than the asking price, that can come up pretty easily of, well, we thought we would shoot a price out there and see what we could get. That sometimes leaves the opening idea that the buyer maybe wasn't really serious about what they wrote, or they're expecting a counteroffer to which they're willing to come up and possibly meet. Motivating factors. I know I one time had a client that shared with me a past real estate experience where she had shared that she was getting divorced and she had to close in 30 days. That agent also represented the seller. The seller also happened to be that agent's aunt. And then definitely she shared she felt like she was taken advantage of because she needed to move so quickly. And because of that divorce as a motivating factor, they definitely tried to negotiate a price that was much higher than what the property would even appraise. The other one is also financial information. I think that we see come up quite a bit. And I know a lot of you are maybe particular about those pre-approval letters. So if your buyer is pre-approved for, this is an obvious example, 500,000, but they're only writing on a property that's maybe at 150, you're probably going to ask the lender to rewrite that letter and customize it for that pre-approval letter so that it matches where they're buying. That way they don't look super, super rich, the seller, and use that as a reason to negotiate not just high in price, but also what that looks like when the seller goes to negotiate the inspection items. Okay. The next question is, must I disclose dual agency? And is there any special language I should use in a dual agency contract? Well, yes, by law, you must always disclose dual agency. Again, dual agency is not where you help a client buy a house and then you help them sell their current home. Dual agency is when you help the same client, you help both clients in the same transaction for the same property. You help both buyer and seller for the same property. Must always be disclosed. And here's the language by law that we're required to have in that dual agency agreement. Representing more than one party to a transaction can create a conflict of interest, since both clients may rely upon the broker's advice, and the client's respective interests may be adverse to each other. Brokers endeavor to be impartial between buyer and seller and will not represent the interest of either the seller or buyer to the exclusion or detriment of the other. Now, here's the good news for you. You do not need to handwrite this in every dual agency contract that you write. your broker, or even if you're using Form Simplicity that's offered to us through the Iowa Association of Realtors, this language is already stock and pre-written for you, so you know you should be covered. But this is by law what we're required to have. The next question is, the listing I have with my seller expired. However, during the listing period, the seller told me some things about the property that could be considered confidential. I am now representing a buyer, and the buyer wants to purchase the property I previously listed. What are my duties and obligations? So, for example, you had a property listed January 1st to June 30th. It expires obviously June 30th. You're no longer representing them. And on July 5th, you've got a buyer that calls and says, hey, Amy, once upon a time, you had that property listed. We're kind of interested in it. So you make arrangements to go and show the property. The seller maybe now has new representation with another agent. What are you able to tell that buyer about that seller that you maybe learned about them when you had the home previously listed? Well, this says that when an agency relationship terminates, the licensee must keep confidential all information received during the relationship, which was confidential by request or instruction from the party they represented. However, this is the big however, right? The big but. But what they must decide to answer this question correctly is whether the confidential information shared by the seller rises to the level of a material adverse fact. If the information does not rise to the level of a material adverse fact, then the information must be disclosed. So anything I would say that would maybe be to their detriment, such as their payoff or maybe what they owe on the property, those things, most likely, that makes sense for you to keep those things confidential. They probably would have requested that from you during the listing period anyway. But again, anything that's a material adverse fact, even if they asked you not to disclose it, by law, we must still do so. So that was our review of agency and some frequently asked questions. Now what's up for you is a quick 5-question quiz. Hopefully it'll be super simple for you. If for some reason you do not pass, you do need to answer 4 out of the 5 questions correctly. You are able to retake that. Once you're done with that, we will come back and we will move on to disclosures. See you soon.